To start off tonight's presentation, I'm just going to walk you through our most recent 2022 Upper Thames River Watershed report cards to give you an understanding of the health of our watershed that we live in. So you might ask, what's a watershed report card? Well, it's a report on environmental information that we produce every 5 years or so. We started our first one in 2001, and roughly every 5 years since then, we've been doing watershed report cards to track our progress, or let's hope progress. And what it is, it's a compilation of a lot of scientific data crunched into a small 8-page report card. And we've divided the Upper Thames River watershed into 28 small watersheds. So sorry the map isn't all that clear, but this is the Upper Thames watershed. We're down here in London. If you follow the Thames River upstream, you'll get up towards Woodstock and beyond. And then the North Thames River flows northwards past St. Mary's up to Mitchell. So it's a large watershed, and so what we found is that by dissecting the watershed into smaller sub-watersheds, so tributaries like the Medway Valley or the Avon River, people are more interested in what's happening in their local watershed maybe than the entire Thames River watershed. And it helps us determine what programs are needed in each specific area. And hopefully that this motivates local action for people to take in their own watershed. We follow guidelines for watershed report cards for Ontario, so we're using the same grading system as other conservation authorities do, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And the primary thing that we do in the report cards is we give grades for surface water quality and forest conditions, along with a lot of other information. Oops. So again, just to see where we're at, we're situated right here in the Masonville area at the top end of what we call the Forks watershed, which is really just the meeting of the North Thames downstream of Fanshawe Reservoir to the Forks of London, east towards Dorchester, and then down to River Bend. So that's the Forks watershed, and we're situated here. And next door is the Medway watershed. So the urban part of London is down here, but the Medway has a lot of rural area as well. And you can pick up a copy of these later on to get a closer look at them. So make sure I go the right direction. Okay, so how do we grade these parameters? So we grade surface water quality and forest conditions, as I said. And we're related. What happens to water and forest conditions is related to the land use that we apply in our area. The Upper Thames Conservation Authority monitors surface water quality, and we also map forest conditions. So it's part of our monitoring program. And as I said, we give a letter grade from A to F, just like in school. If you get an A, that's excellent. If you get a C, that's fair. And if you get an F, that's quite poor. So it helps us judge whether the environmental programs we're offering are working, and if we need more of them, for example. And as I said, it's a province-wide grading system, so you're not going to see a lot of A grades in this part of southwestern Ontario. We've got a lot of development, a lot of agriculture. You see more A grades in the northern part of Ontario or the eastern part, where there's a lot more forest cover, a lot less human disturbance. So let's get right into it. So surface water quality. There are 3 indicators that we use to grade the surface water quality. So one of them is total phosphorus, so the amount of phosphorus we're finding in the water. And phosphorus comes from things like fertilizers that you apply to farmland or your lawn, detergents, and wastewater. And the problem with phosphorus is that it contributes to excess algae growth. You might have heard about the algae growth in Lake Erie, and that's because of a lot of phosphorus in the water. And when the algae die, they rob the water of oxygen, and that creates a problem for the life. So the other indicator we use is E. coli bacteria, and this is a fecal coliform bacteria that's found in the gut of humans and animals. And the presence of it is a strong indicator for other disease-causing organisms in the water. So we measure E. coli bacteria. And you might have heard about the Walkerton disaster, of course, and E. coli was the source of the problem there. And the last one is benthic macroinvertebrates. And these are the little aquatic bugs that live in the stream bed sediments. And they're a good indicator of water quality because they live there year round. So this picture of a little nymph there, it can't scurry away if a pollution plume comes along. So we look at the type of species of bugs that are living on the stream bed. Some species cannot tolerate pollution, so if they're present, it means your water is probably pretty good. If you have a lot of lower life forms, worms and scuds and so on, that indicates they have a tolerance for pollution and they can be there. So we look at all the species, we give them a score, and that helps us determine water quality. So here are the results. I'm going to use this pointer here. So the map on the right, the colors that are in green are the C grades. There are 14 of those. And the colors in this yellow color are the D grades. So you'll see we've got an even distribution of C's and D's. Remember I said this part of southwestern Ontario, no A's. But then interesting, it takes a lot of change to go from a B to a C or a C to a B. But what we look at is the little nuance differences. And what we found is that 5 watersheds showed some improvement. Not enough to change a grade, but some improvement. The majority, 21, stayed steady, and 2 sub-watersheds saw some decline. So this is the kind of information we're interested in. Overall, if we look at what was our phosphorus levels like in the Upper Thames, overall it's a D grade. The amount of bacteria, a little better, C grade. And the benthic macroinvertebrants, a D grade. So overall, we could say the Upper Thames watershed water quality is a D grade. If we look more locally here in the Medway watershed, it got a C grade with some slight improvement. And in the Forks, D grade, and it was steady since last time. And the last report cards were in 2017, so we're comparing 2022 to 2017. So you might ask, well, what causes the water quality problems? Well, there's a lot of factors that combine to influence water quality. What we've seen that over the long term, like if you look back 30, 40 years, water quality was a lot poorer. So we've come a long way in cleaning up a lot of pollution that existed then, primarily through improved wastewater treatment in our cities and towns. But since then, it's been kind of steady. What we're finding nowadays with climate change is we're getting larger and more severe storm events, and it's these big storm events that are delivering the highest amount of pollution down into the river system. So that's something to be concerned about. This photo here shows that some grab water samples that were taken just before, during, and after a storm event. So you can see the water was fairly clear before the storm. At the height of the storm, all the sediment and pollution that was in the river, and then slowly it clears up afterwards. But it's not all bad news. There are things we can do about it, and we're finding that if we plant streamside vegetation, this can help water quality. So stretches of the river where we've planted a lot of trees, this can help improve water quality by intercepting pollution that may get to the river, and also providing the shade and the nutrients that the aquatic life need to grow healthfully. Now in forest conditions, so we have 3 indicators for forest conditions. Number 1 is percent forest cover, and this is simply the percentage of a watershed that's forested or wooded. Environment Canada put out a report several years ago and determined that we need around at least 30% forest cover to maintain our native species and to maintain watershed health. Now we're far below 30% in this part of Ontario, but it gives us an idea of where we could be, or if we want to keep incrementally getting there. The next indicator is percent forest interior, and this is the percent of the watershed that is forest interior, which is that protected core of a woodlot 100 meters in from any side. So if you can walk across a woodlot from one end to the other, you've only taken 100 steps, there's no forest interior there. So it needs to be a larger, wider woodlot. And they found that several bird species require these larger protected woodlots to nest successfully. And again, the guideline says we need 10% of this, and we're far, far below that. And finally, the percent riparian zone forested. And this is simply the amount of forest cover within 30 meters of all open water courses. And we know that forests that are near water support higher numbers of wildlife. Animals are attracted to the water and use the water. And also the forests protect the water. So what we've also discovered is we need around 50% of our watercourses to be buffered by forest to be a healthy system. So that's where we're going to. So here are the results. So first of all, this is based on 2015 aerial photography. These are GIS exercises. No one's walking out measuring forests anymore. It's all done on computer and aerial photography. And there's always a delay between the time that we get the photography and we process it and put it in these report cards. So again, we've got a lot of C's and D's. So the green, it's hard to see on this screen, but the green watersheds are C grades. Most of all, the yellowish color is the D. And we have one F grade up at the top end near Mitchell. Very low forest cover in this part of Perth County. Again, it takes a lot to jump from one grade to the other. We don't grow forests all that fast. But what we did find is that 10 of the subwatersheds showed some slight improvement, 13 were steady, and 5 showed some decline. And I'll talk about that in the next slide. Overall, we've got 11.3% forest cover across the Upper Thames. So remember I said 30% is sort of what we need? We're down around 11%. Our interior, only 1.5, which is an F grade. But our riparian zone, the area along the rivers, is 35% covered. So that's a C grade, so not too shabby. So overall, a D grade for forest conditions, just like the water quality. Just some results locally here. You can see that in the Forks of Watershed, in the heart of the City of London, there's only 8.2% forest cover, very little interior, meaning the forests are all quite narrow and small. But the good news is there's almost 50% riparian zone forested, which is a B grade, which gives you an idea that most of the forests in London are along a watercourse or the Thames River. And the Medway, a little bit more forest cover, a little bit less riparian cover, so they're all a little bit unique. So I talked about gain and loss. When we measure things like gain, we're so good now with the computer, we can measure the amount of hectares that are lost and gained over time. It's not so interesting to say the forest cover went from 11.2% to 11.3%, you'd go, eh. But if you say, we gained 781 hectares, that seems more amazing, and it really is amazing. So how did we get 781 more hectares of forest since 5 years ago? Well, this is due to forest succession from younger habitats like thickets, shrub thickets, and young tree plantations. So it takes, they're on the landscape, it's like this one here, they're slowly growing, and after 20, 30, 40, 50 years, they're finally old enough to be called a forest. There was a lot of tree planting in this watershed in the 1970s and 80s, and a lot of these trees are now becoming mature enough to be called forests. So that's the gain that we're seeing. But just to note that tree planting rates have slowed down over time since that time. So we're not likely to see this jump in this gain in forest going forward. And we're still seeing real loss. So we're still seeing woodlands come down. So over 350 hectares of woodland were lost in the 5 years between 2010 and 2015. And you say, well, where did that go? Well, they are converted to urban or rural land uses. So this air photo here shows a little woodlot along a stream that was here in 2010. And in the 2015 air photography, the trees had just been cut down. So what we're seeing is that it's a little here, a little there. It's not one huge 200 hectare woodlot coming down. It's a lot of little edges being lost. And it's kind of in keeping with the kind of losses we're seeing every 5 years if you look back in time. In the Medway watershed, for example, we gained 16 hectares, but lost 40. So there's the slight decline that we're seeing. So those are the two parameters that we give grades to. We also provide a lot of information on groundwater, and we don't grade it at this point because we don't have enough sample points. But we provide a lot of, every report card has a map showing where the wells are and the significant groundwater recharge areas. So across the Upper Thames, there's 70 municipal wells that the communities rely on, over 18,000 private wells, So it's a very important resource to keep an eye on. We have a sampling program where we sample 28 wells across the watershed to get an understanding of how the quality and the quantity of our groundwater is doing. And basically, almost a quarter of the watershed is within what we call a significant groundwater recharge area or highly vulnerable aquifer, which means pollution on the surface can more readily get into the groundwater in these areas. So these dark colored zones are the areas we need to be most careful about avoiding pollution. So in addition to those things, the report cards provide a lot of other information on the features of the watershed to help explain the nature of that watershed. So we give information on stressors like population growth. So there's 54,000 more people in the watershed than there was in the 2016 census. So that's a lot more people on the landscape. And the Forks watershed, 8% increase, Medway, 19. So areas that are urbanizing especially see a large population change. So, you know, when we have more people, more intense uses on the land, even if our grades stay steady, that in a way is an improvement because it could go the other way. We also give reports on how many dams and barriers are on all the watercourses, over 600. And barriers are not just things like dams and weirs, they're also things like perched culverts where a fish can't get up a culvert from the lower level, beaver dams, stormwater ponds, and so on. We provide information on wetland cover. So there's only 5.2% wetland cover in our watershed, a D grade. But we have some A's. So the Komoka watershed just west of London, Dorchester just east, they've got some big wetlands that are doing well. Other things that we report on are fish species. There's 80 species of fish in the Thames, one of the most diverse fisheries in Canada. The Forks alone has 63 species of fish, Medway 54. So there's good diversity of fish life in all our watersheds. We've also got a lot of mussel species in this watershed, 30 species. Unfortunately, 9 of them are species at risk, so these organisms are having a tough time in today's altered landscape. Also, we provide information on the watercourses. Of the 6,000 kilometers of watercourse in the Upper Thames, only 30% is in a natural state, 39% has been channelized or straightened, and 31% buried. So this kind of gives you an indication of what's happening. We also get some information on the province on the number of spills that happen in the watershed. So we've seen over 470 spills occurred in the 5 years between 2016 and 2020 up from the previous time zone. So this map shows the watersheds with the darkest color, like London, had the most spills, which you kind of expect because of the nature of the land use. And most of the spills are things like industrial chemicals, fuels, a little bit of sewage, and a little bit of manure. And as I said, most of the spills are in the urban areas. So that's a lot of information, but we also want to always remember that what happens upstream affects downstream. We're the upper Thames River, but there's also a lower Thames River downstream of Delaware that passes through the First Nation reserves, past Chatham, and out into Lake St. Clair, through the Detroit River and into Lake Erie. So keeping this watershed healthy helps all the watersheds down below. And we've initiated a shared waters approach, which is an updated Thames River water management plan. And we've had partners with First Nations, federal and provincial governments, the municipalities, both conservation authorities, all working on finding ways to improve the water quality and the quantity in the Thames River. And some good implementation is underway right now. So every report card also contains a list of actions for improvement. So it's one thing to say, okay, you've got a D, well, what can we do about it? So we provide suggested actions that can help. So for example, in urbanizing areas, using what we call low impact development techniques such as rain gardens. And this can help reduce stormwater runoff and help absorb the water back into the ground. In rural areas, establishing cover crops over the winter to reduce runoff and to hold soil erosion. Because you can imagine a bare field in March that has a big storm hitting it, a lot of that soil is ending up in the river. But if there's a crop on it with roots, that's going to hold the soil in place. And finally, continuing to plant trees along our streams and watercourses. Not only will it protect the water, but it can connect a woodlot that's over here to another woodlot that's downstream. And we know wildlife need to use these corridors. And the last page of the report cards is a highlight of progress since 2017. A lot of people are doing a lot of good work, and we want to mention that and pay tribute to it. So we give examples for each watershed and what good deeds have happened. So for example, there's a tree power program that started in London and is now offered in Stratford, St. Mary's, and Perth South, where it encourages people to buy native trees and plant them on their lands. The Friends of Medway helped plant over 7,300 trees since 2017 at 12 sites. So lots of good work happening by volunteers and community members. And we also want to highlight things that aren't so glamorous, such as our sewage and infrastructure projects. So updating our wastewater treatment plants, very expensive but very effective at helping water quality. Stratford, London, Woodstock are all investing in their sewage systems to keep the water cleaner. We also report on tree planting. I've mentioned some of that before, but the Upper Thames has an active tree planting program, and in these 5 years we planted over 235,000 trees at 500 sites. So the community, the students are all lending a hand to get our next generation of forests started, because you can't get a forest unless you start putting that first tree in the ground, right? And the map here shows that the watersheds with the darkest green are planting the largest number of trees in this 5-year time period. So ultimately, we hope the report cards help turn information into action. We want to create awareness about local watersheds. We host workshops every spring to talk to rural landowners about the grants they can get to help with tree planting and erosion control. We're always promoting our best management practices about cover crops, constructed wetlands, and other things that we can help people with. The Upper Thames developed a set of environmental targets back in 2016, and one of our targets is to improve each sub-watershed's water quality grade by 1 grade by 2037. And the other target was to establish and restore 1,500 hectares of native vegetation, windbreaks, covers, and so on by 2037. So very high goals, but we need to have a goal in order to try to get there. And we hope the report cards are an information resource for planning and education, not only for our staff, for municipalities, the public, partners, students, researchers. So all of the information is on our website. And new this year, we've got some interactive maps. When you click on the watershed report cards on our website, you can play around with, show me where all the D grades are and show me where all the A grades are. Well, you're not going to find those, but you can kind of move around the watershed and learn a little bit about it. And there's even a new story map on the website where you can click on one of the watersheds, say the Avon River, and it shows you some pictures of the watershed, some of the work that the people are doing locally. Again, get you familiar with who's doing what and what we have to offer. So there again is our website, thamesriver.01.ca, and you can find all the report cards there. And I brought copies of the Medway and the Forks with me, so you're welcome to grab a copy on your way out.
My name is Brendon. I'm a PhD candidate at Western University in the Department of Biology. I'm really excited to be here to share some of the work that we've been doing at Western, a project that's very much linked to the objectives outlined in Cathy's talk for promoting watershed health. I thought before I get into the details of what we've been working on, I wanted to show a video, actually a brief documentary that we produced about the project that I think situates everything really nicely. We've got imminent risk of flooding in Ontario. We are losing habitat, and there are things that we can do in environments, especially along watercourses, to help buffer against flooding and restore habitat. So this has been a collaboration of many minds and hearts at Western. We've got a wonderful team of students across disciplines working together with the local conservation authority, UTRCA, to do some work restoring the bank of Medway Creek, aimed at improving water quality and resiliency to flooding.
We're here today doing live staking, which is a form of bioengineering. And bioengineering uses living and dead materials to help to stabilize slopes and stream banks and such. And we're using sandbar willow, a native willow. And what we're doing is we're putting them into the bank of the creek as deep as we can to hopefully get to the water level, so that when they sit, they will draw in that water and they will start to grow.
The sandbar willow is a very optimistic tree. It will resucker and continue to grow. So that's the nice thing about harvesting the willow, is that you can come back to the same site year after year, well, usually every couple of years, and we can use the same willow again and again. The nice thing about willows too is they do have a hormone in them that allows them to root. So willows is a really good candidate for this type of staking because they do root so easily.
Starting at the water's edge, they stop erosion or control erosion. Many of our stream banks in southwestern Ontario are in dire need of stabilization. They are slumping and eroding.
Yeah, it's exactly sometimes, being hanging out with friends, studying on your own focus groups may seem a priority, but at the end I do feel like as a part of the planet we have some responsibility toward the planet, like campus, and especially a part of Western, we have one of our beautiful campus. So I really want to get involved, and from my few initials here I go to meet some. Brendon is one of them, few other focus peoples to get involved, and then there are many initiatives. I went on few wellness walks with them, and then I get to know the campus more and get involved, and that really fascinates me how beautiful our campus is with all this diversity and the river, all the biodiversity we have.
I was asked to come in, just share some knowledge and speak and open up the event in a good way, and so we did that first. I just explained who I was and where I learned the knowledge I carry, which is from the Three Fires Medewan Lodge, and I am Medewan, and I brought my daughter with me. We both are in a line of women that have the responsibility to take care of the water, and our responsibility is not just to the physical water, but it's to the spirit of the water as well.
I think something that's important to reflect on is that people have been connected to water and this river here for many, many thousands of years. There are ancient relationships afoot, and actions and behaviors and systems that we've built in just the last couple of years have tarnished those relationships and caused quite a bit of harm.
Oneida Nation of the Thames has been on a boil water advisory since 2019. Our nation has both a quality and a quantity issue in our community, both bad water and not enough of it, essentially. Our community currently gathers its water directly from the Thames River. There is a holistic interconnection between humans, the land, the water, and we have to all find a way to come together in a space that's peaceful, where we're not disturbing and not interfering with the natural system.
And in fact, the land and Indigenous peoples are fundamentally interconnected. We are planting species that belong here, we're respecting our relations, we're honoring long-standing relations that Indigenous peoples have had to the land. It's really a thrill to see that kind of work happening on a university campus. I just want to say, as the credits are rolling, this was a student-led project working with faculty, a variety of partners from across the university. I'll talk a little bit more about that afterwards, but really this was a collective exercise of many people coming together. So why am I here today? The video really tells the story nicely. I wanted to elaborate on this and share a bit about the actual experiences that we had doing this work and some of the lessons learned in researching flooding in a local and regional context, information that we felt should be translated and put out there for a local audience as well as a global one. So I'm going to try and use the mouse since that seems to be working. As I proceed, I'll just show you some of my photos taken from the project. This is the location we were working on, Medway Creek. It's behind Westminster Hall on campus. Here's a photo taken during the water blessing ceremony that was offered by Wasezi Deliri and her daughter. This is what the stakes looked like towards the end of the summer. We had pretty high survival rate. I think something upwards of 80 or 90% of the stakes that went into the ground ultimately took and grew leaves and roots. We had a heat wave in August, and so I had to kind of get out there and wade into the creek and fill up buckets and do the watering, which was interesting. And I was supervised in that work by the resident family of Canada geese and their young, who were puzzled by what we were doing in their space, but seemed to appreciate the vegetation there. This is one of the signs that was erected at the site. This is part of a program at Western called Campus as a Living Lab, taking advantage of the really precious natural heritage we have on campus and using it as a tool for teaching. And in September, as part of orientation services, we actually went back to the site with undergraduate students, and we planted hundreds more species of native wildflowers. Recognizing that trees don't grow alone in a vacuum, we actually need to pay attention to what's growing in the understory around those trees. And so this is creating a really nice lush buffer, mixed vegetation community along the creek. This is what the site looked like in September after our planting. Over time, this is going to grow taller and taller into a riparian corridor. So all of this work was made possible under a new program at Western that we were privileged to be part of the first iteration of, called Thinking Globally, Acting Locally. And what does that mean? We're thinking globally about problems facing humanity at the level of the entire planet. And acting locally, as in recognizing the implications of those challenges in our local communities, developing solutions in a local-facing way. This is part of how we approached addressing our research question, which was, how does tree planting along watercourses help with flooding? And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that next. I want to also situate the work that we're doing within the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. This is an important area of focus for Western as it's carrying out its strategic plan, which really emphasizes sustainability. Our project addresses Sustainable Development Goal 6, clean water and sanitation, 13, climate action, which includes adaptation, number 14, life below water, and number 15, life on land. And I mentioned Western's strategic plan. In the strategic plan, there is in fact explicit emphasis on protecting campus biodiversity. This was really important for us to reflect on the university's role as stewards of the land, and reflecting also on Western's place in the world and situating ourselves in the watershed. So this brings us to our project. We gathered along the creek that day. You can see actually this is a really nice diverse representation of the people involved. We had Wasezi and her daughter, Brendon Dockstader from Oneida, faculty from Thames, and staff from the Conservation Authority, showing not just the live stakes, but some of the shrubs that we planted, just set back by a few feet. This is the process of preparing those stakes. So originally I was thinking about it kind of like a cutting, where if you take a cutting off of a houseplant and you root it in water, it'll grow roots. This is kind of like that, but you have to be able to get that cutting deep into the ground in the first place. And so it was really important that we sharpened those cuttings of sandbar willow using an axe. They made really light work of it, but it's tough. Like, my arms were pretty sore after that. You saw in the video that we had sourced these cuttings from elsewhere in the watershed on lands managed by the authority. And this is a really nice representation, artwork that we commissioned for the project by Emma Richards, a local artist in Western Alum. And we wanted to depict what this might look like over time as the vegetation grows in. So you can see, the progress happens incrementally, but over the coming years, we're going to start to see more of those trees and shrubs growing in and really creating a nice area of habitat for wildlife. And it's not just what happens above the ground, it's also what's happening below the ground. Some of those roots that enter the watercourse are also creating nurseries for freshwater fish that occur in the creek. We had some interesting snafus in getting this project off the ground initially. In fact, the red line you see is where we envisioned to do the planting, and this was taken just a few days before our planting in spring. You can see it's underwater. There's something a bit ironic about a plan to mitigate flooding being interrupted by flooding itself. But all the more reason we felt that it was really important and we had selected an appropriate site. This is certainly not the highest that water gets. It's gotten dangerously close to the building just behind there. So I'm going to talk a little bit about flooding because the implications of this are not just for the protection of the environment and biodiversity, but also for human health and safety and thinking about the ways that the environment is changing around us and the risks that introduces. Some people might know this, other people might not know, but in fact much of London where we live was built in areas that are recognized as floodplain. So these are regulated areas where we can expect predictably they're going to be underwater more frequently than the surrounding landscape. This has to do with the elevation and the ways that water moves through the environment. This is a map from the City of London, it's the zoning map. And the blue line shows the regulatory flood line. So technically speaking, everything inside of that blue line is an area that we expect to be susceptible to flooding. By the way, you'll see embedded in my slides some hyperlinks. At the end, there's a QR code that you can scan if you're interested to access these slides, and you can click through and read any of these resources that might be of interest. That's for the folks here in person and online. We know that flooding is not a new phenomenon on Western's campus. It's something that the community has become increasingly aware of, and we're starting to recognize the need to plan for that proactively. These are photographs taken in 2018 of some pretty serious flooding we had. And this is expensive. Cumulatively, it is quite costly as a form of climate change hazard. 2022 was one of the most expensive years on record, $3.1 billion in insured damages in Canada. And this is getting worse. We know that with global weirding of weather under climate change that we're getting more severe storms, we're getting more flooding, and our landscape, the way that we've created a lot of impermeable surface or parking lots and roads, exacerbates that flood risk. I talked about impermeable surface. It's also important to recognize just how much has changed in our landscape in just the last couple hundred years. Much of this region was covered in woodlots and in wetlands. And when water reaches those natural cover types, it infiltrates readily into the earth. And so that's entering the groundwater, finding its way to the watercourse. Whereas today you end up with a lot of runoff where water pools on top of concrete and pavement like we saw in the last slide. And as was mentioned before, Environment Canada publishes recommendations for the minimum percentages of cover we need for things like forest and wetland. We need a minimum of 10% wetland cover for a healthy watershed, and there are parts of southwestern Ontario that are dangerously close to that threshold. So, what else happens with flooding? It obviously exacerbates a lot of pollution concerns. Nowadays, myself and Tom work on picking up a lot of garbage with community help through Antler River Rally. And so garbage is frequently swept up into the Thames River during storms. Winter road salt is another one that increases salinity in the watershed. Pesticides, so that's a lot of things used in agricultural settings. I include this photo of rodenticide because it is a harmful form of pesticide entering the environment we don't always think about. And then of course fertilizer runoff as well. And on the latter point, I want to call back to something that was talked about in the last presentation, which was where the Thames River actually goes and what is happening to those pollutants as they're carrying downstream. It drains into eventually Lake St. Clair and then onto Lake Erie. And we have seen worsening algae blooms happening in the Great Lakes. This is caused by excess nutrients from fertilizer runoff entering those bodies of water. And when that happens and you get a lot of algae pooling, it reduces the oxygen in the water that's available to support freshwater animals. And so this affects a lot of natural systems outside of our immediate watercourse. We have to think about our downstream relationships too. There's also really significant personal risks of flooding, and I want to really underscore this for folks thinking about actions that they can take at home. Flooding is expensive not just for our society, but for the average homeowner, because if you get flooding in your basement, I'm sorry to say, but your home insurance policy is probably not going to cover that. I actually found that out the hard way myself not too long ago. The average cost of a flooded basement is over $40,000 in Ontario. And there are very simple things that we can do to limit the risk of flooding occurring in basements. A big one, and one that we're trying to make more people aware of, is the opportunity to install a backwater valve underground. So that's preventing water from entering from outside your home through your pipes into your basement. That costs about $250 for a new home. It's a wonder we don't have this in the building code as a standard requirement. I really hope we're heading there. It can be retrofitted into an existing home for slightly more money, but again, far less than the cost of a flooded basement. So this is something to think about. Of course, it's not just backwater valves. There's a lot of other simple things you can do around your home. I would encourage you to check out the booths on the other side of the room, which talk a little bit about flooding and emergency preparedness. Something as simple as directing your downspouts from your roof a solid distance away from your home can make a big difference. We heard a little bit about pollution entering the Thames River. I know this is a point of interest for the community. Nobody wants the river to be polluted, but it's really important to understand how that pollution is entering the watercourse in the first place. We heard a little bit about combined sewers. These are legacy infrastructure that was built a long time ago, not anticipating the growth that would occur in London. And those sewers, when they're overwhelmed with floodwater, they combine with wastewater, and all of that can get dumped from our treatment plants into the Thames River. This is very expensive to fix, but it is an active priority in the city. We are funding solutions to fix this problem. However, there are also individual actions that are needed at the level of individual homes. Weeping tile systems are found around a lot of older homes in the city. There's as many as 50,000 connections like this in London, and those are often used in properties that have sump pumps. Those are another instance where you can have elevated flood risk and you're exacerbating the risk of pollution, wastewater, and stormwater getting combined. And in fact, this can be fixed with financial supports from the municipal government. There's a weeping tile replacement grant that's offered. I've heard that not enough people are applying to that grant program. So find out if your house even has a weeping tile system, and then think about maybe considering doing some retrofitting for climate change adaptation. I want to point also to this resource. If you're interested in some of those techniques for limiting your risk of basement flooding, really worthwhile to check out. As I've talked about already, the City of London is prioritizing taking better care of the Thames River. This is reflected in our strategic plan, which really outlines what are we doing moving forward. What are we spending taxpayer money on? What are we talking about at City Hall? More people need to read this and engage with it and understand what's happening in our city. Do check out the strategic plan in particular. There's a pillar, climate action and sustainable growth. And the linkages between the strategic plan and what we've heard about in the presentations today are really quite obvious. Implementing the shared waters approach, taking better care of our watersheds, protecting natural heritage areas, and then of course the community piece. So engaging the public in climate action, educating people about solutions they can take at home or at work, and preparing for that extreme weather that we're likely to see that leads to flooding. There's also a lot of work ongoing in the city to try and plant more trees. Cathy talked a little bit about that in the context of UTRCA. This is reflected in our Climate Emergency Action Plan, especially Work Plan number 6, which talks about nature-based solutions. We have a tree planting strategy as well as an urban forest strategy. Interestingly, these are coming up for discussion sometime next year. These strategies are now a few years old, and there's going to be opportunities for the public to weigh in on whether we're doing enough, whether we're taking the right approaches to getting more trees in the ground. A huge emphasis is going to be on planting trees on private land, which is going to require more partnerships. So please do check out these resources and get involved. I've compiled some more resources here for people that are interested to take action at home around flooding and to learn more about what's going on in our watershed. So great information from the city about limiting flood risk, and you can access some of that at the booth here today. We've already heard from the UTRCA about their watershed report cards. Their website is really informative and awesome. Do check it out. I actually installed a rain garden at my house through a program offered by the London Environmental Network that's supported by the City of London. It doesn't look like much, but the photo on the right, we had to dig a really deep hole in the ground in my front yard, and we filled it with gravel and then with substrate and planted native species that really like moisture. The hose that you see is actually connected to the downspouts that feed from my roof. And so this is another way of using vegetation to capture some of that excess stormwater, prevent runoff, and reduce the volume that's entering our sewers. And then if you're interested in planting trees, in addition to working with the UTRCA, Reforest London is a really active program. They offer a number of programs in the community, offering trees basically wherever we can put them. I talked a little bit about the need to not just consider planting trees, but what grows around the trees. And so if you have an area in your yard where you're thinking about planting trees, consider naturalizing a little space around it as well. I have a box at the back with dozens of native species seeds that I've collected, and happy to share those with you if you're interested. And I want to wrap up there just by acknowledging, in a similar vein to how I started this talk, that all of this is made possible by partnerships and by trust. I'm a student, okay? So for me, I go to school, I pay tuition. This has been enormous value added for me, and it's made possible because people saw the work I wanted to do, and they said, you know what, this is a person who seems to care, who is willing to invest the time. I'm really, really proud of Western for organizing this opportunity. I'm really proud that the students that were involved actually got paid to do this work. That's a really, really important part of making climate action sustainable, is we have to recognize it and treat it like work. You know, the School of Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies, Western Science, Western Sustainability, Faculty of Information and Media Studies. There's a lot of different parts of the university that came together to make this happen, and it gives me a lot of hope. And then, of course, our community partners. We could not do this work without the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority, lending the expertise, building that relationship of trust with Western, the City of London and the London Public Library for allowing us to be here today and help to translate this knowledge for community benefit. And with that, I just want to remind folks, if you're interested in anything I've talked about today, you can scan the QR code here. It'll give you access to my slides, and you can click through to anything you're wanting to read more about. And I'd be happy to take any questions. Thanks for listening.